皆さん、こんにちは。本日は本セミナーにご参加いただきまして、誠にありがとうございます。私、本プロジェクトの共同リーダーの一人、同志社大学の川島です。技術的な点に最初に触れますが、Zoom の同時通訳機能をお使いいただくには、画面の下の方にあります通訳とあるアイコンを押して言語をお選びください。バイリンガルの方はオリジナルをお選びください。本プロジェクトは日英それぞれ公的研究助成機関からの共同助成金を受けて開始した文化政策研究で、本日のセミナーはその初年度の研究経過の一部を公開するイベントの第1弾です。詳細は次のスピーカーより話がありますが、本日は日本、英国の文化エンゲージメント、すなわち観客として鑑賞すること、自ら創造活動に携わること、あるいはその手伝いなどをすることを指していますが、その文化エンゲージメントに関する実態調査の結果をご紹介いたします。90分と短いセミナーではありますが、報告とコメントなどに続き、質疑応答の時間も取ってありますので、ぜひ Q&A の機能を使って質問、コメントなどをお寄せください。時間の関係上、すべてにお答えすることはできない可能性があります。それでは、英語でも挨拶させていただきます。Hello everyone, welcome to the seminar on the Sustainable Cultural Futures. My name is Nobuko Kawashima from Doshisha University. I'm one of the principal investigators for the research project co-funded by research councils in the UK and in Japan.Well, just to make sure that you have by now understood how to make use of the simultaneous translation function we provide, please click the icon for interpretation below the screen and choose the language you prefer, English, Japanese, or original. Original is for those of you who are bilingual. We plan to present a series of online seminars and other events in the coming years, and today's seminar is the very first one. As you may well be aware, there is time for questions and answers after papers and comments from our panelists, so please post questions through the Q&A function. Okay, let me introduce the first speaker, Hai-Kyun Lee from King's College London, who is going to talk about the research project and also the design of our research surveys. So Hae-Kyun, please start.
Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, thank you so much. So I'm Hai-Kyun Lee, and I'm leading the UK team, which is based at King's College London. And the Arts Council England is supporting us as our project partner. So this is the outline of my talk. So firstly, an overview of cultural policies in the UK and Japan, and common agendas and issues, and the UK-Japan Sustainable Cultural Futures project, and designing a public survey on cultural engagement, cultural policy, and cultural value. And finally, I'll be making some comments on the challenges we have been facing. So very, very briefly, this is a sort of complete, simplified version of an overview of cultural policy and funding in the UK. So we have the Cultural Ministry, which is called the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and the devolved governments in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. However, a lot of cultural policy making in the country is happening through the independent arts councils and creative agencies who get funding from the government as well as the National Lottery. And of course, we have local authorities who provide cultural infrastructure, cultural services, as well as local cultural funding. Now, Japan, the shape of cultural policy and funding looks quite different. Overall, the Japanese cultural policy is quite fragmented, involving many different government ministries as well as local authorities. The main actor here is called Agency for Cultural Affairs, or ACA, However, ACA's scope and mission is limited to supporting cultural heritage and promoting national cultural and arts institutions. The ACA's budget is only around 0.1% of the Japanese government's expenditure. And there is the Full Japan policy. However, this policy is more about tourism and nation branding rather than supporting the nation's cultural industries and cultural economy. So the UK and Japan are two very different countries, but they have something in common, which is the relative lack of government spending on culture defined broadly, including the cultural sector, recreation, and religion. So this graph from the OECD website shows general government spending on the cultural sector defined very broadly as percentage of GDP. This can be seen as an indicator of the government commitment to culture. So it is very notable here that both the UK and Japan are quite lagged behind other OECD countries. So during the past 20 years, we saw this pattern of the comparative lack of government investment in culture and the arts in the UK and Japan. Now, common agendas and problems are within the two different national contexts. The cultural policy in Japan, again, has been notably liberal and minimalist. Its policymakers have even avoided using the term cultural policy, and they are reluctant to intervene in the affairs of culture and the arts. The COVID rescue package was a huge exception here. Meanwhile, the UK has a stronger tradition of cultural investment and cultural policy. However, in my view, UK policymakers are not confident either, always looking for justifications, excuses for state funding, such as economic impact and social impact of culture and the arts. So economic or instrumental value of culture is a very familiar story in the UK. And it has been heavily criticized by many academics in the past 20 years. And in Japan, however, it is now gaining currency. So there is a sort of time gap between the two countries. Meanwhile, the Japanese government isn't convinced by the idea that the state should intervene and invest in the creative economy, the creative industries. And in terms of cultural engagement, Pierre Bourdie's theory applies more to Japan, to the UK. In Japan, cultural stratification is less related to social class, income, or education. And policymakers in the UK are very keen to tackle the unequal distribution of culture and the arts in terms of region, class, and ethnicity. But in Japan, geography, gender, and age seem to be more important factors. In the UK's cultural policy, there has been a shift towards cultural democracy and everyday creativity. However, Japanese cultural policy looks more concerned with elite and traditional forms of culture. And the revitalization of region is a very, very important agenda for policymakers. In the UK, the focus is to address regional cultural inequality, and this is also a means to tackle class-based and ethnicity-based inequality in the country. However, in Japan, the key concern is more about finding cultural solutions to the aging society and declining rural villages. In Japan today, I think that there is an increasing call for more cultural policy, more coherent cultural policy, and more support for culture and the arts. And both countries saw the significant impact of the COVID-19 crisis, particularly on freelance artists and cultural workers, and also the rising demand for more attention and resources to tackle the precarity in cultural work and labor. So in a nutshell, we can say that in both countries, cultural policy is at a crossroad. And many of these issues and problems and agendas, policy agendas, are shared by other countries, meaning that there is very strong need for cross-national comparison and comparative thinking and research collaboration from a mid to long-term perspective. And we think that it is quite interesting and helpful to look at institutional factors. So between this year and 2024, we are dealing with 3 core themes. Theme 1, cultural engagement, cultural value, and purposes of cultural policy. Theme 2, institutions of cultural work and labor. Theme 3, the digital pivot in cultural production and consumption. As part of our Theme 1 activity, we conducted a survey, a public survey in each country with focus on cultural engagement, cultural values, and the public's awareness of cultural policy goals, and public cultural subsidy, and local cultural life in the case of the UK. And we also asked some questions on personal values and happiness. So after my talk, you will hear some of the key findings from the surveys in the both countries, especially on cultural engagement. So finally, I'd like to make some comments on the challenges we have faced. First of all, the UK and Japan are 2 very different countries, and there is no existing UK-Japan comparative cultural policy research. And there are different understandings of culture and the arts in the 2 countries. For example, in Japan, the meaning of culture or scope of culture includes traditional art, traditional performing arts, traditional dance, flower arrangement, bonsai exhibition, food, traditional local festival, etc. And the age range for childhood is different between the 2 countries. And the UK survey covered England rather than the UK as a whole, whilst the Japanese survey covered the whole country. And Japanese respondents looks more prone to say not decided. And I think that there is something cultural here. And due to these differences, we couldn't use an identical survey questionnaire. However, we shared some important identical questions between the 2 countries. And each country had a slightly different focus and emphasis. The UK team was keen on local cultural life in relation to the agenda of cultural democracy and leveling up, which is about tackling regional inequality. But we struggled to translate this idea of cultural democracy into actual survey questions. It was very difficult. And the Japanese team wanted to look into cultural consumption more and profile specific groups of people using the questions on happiness and personal values. And therefore, a question is arising about what we are doing here. Is it a comparative study or cross-national comparison? Or is it more about contextualization of public cultural engagement and attendance and participation? Or is it something in between? In my view, what we try to do is something in between. Still, there are very interesting findings from the surveys that allow us for comparison in its broad sense. So this is the end of my talk. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Hae-Yeon. It was very helpful. I'm particularly thankful that you summed up what Japanese cultural policy is like. It was very helpful introduction to UK audience, I believe. Okay. それではこ ここから日本の報告に移りたいと思います。最初の報告者は、同志社大学准教授の迫田さやかさんです。格差の社会学、経済学がご専門の先生です。それでは迫田さん、よろしくお願いいたします。
では、日本における文化鑑賞参加行動調査結果よりについて、同志社大学経済学部の川島信子先生、八木忠先生との共同研究の成果について少しお話をさせていただきたいと思います。先ほどにも説明がありましたように、プロジェクトの初年度であります今年は、文化政策、文化の価値に関する両国民の意識と文化鑑賞の実態をテーマとしてウェブ調査をいたしました。日本の調査もイギリスでの調査と同様にして NTT コムオンラインに委託してインターネット調査を行いました。実施期間は2022年7月13日から15日で、日本国内に住む18歳以上の男女2237名で、2020年の国勢調査と同様の分布になるように、年齢、都道府県で割り付けを行いました。プロジェクトの初年度であります今年は、文化政策、文化の価値に関する両国民の意識と文化鑑賞の実態をテーマとしてウェブ調査をいたしました。で、その実施期間が2022年7月13日から15日で、日本国内に住む18歳以上の男女2237名で、2020年の国勢調査と同様の分布になるよう、年齢、都道府県で割り付けを行いました。この調査においては、幼少期から13歳までの文化体験、習い事の有無や、2016年から2020年、すなわちですね、コロナ禍前の4年間の文化鑑賞、参加行動について、また現在についてはオンラインの文化鑑賞についても尋ねています。社会における文化の価値について個人の価値観なども聞いたりしています。その他、美術品の購入の有無や文化への寄付、日本の文化政策についての賛否やアーティスト個人への支援についての意見なども聞いています。また、抑制変数として一般的な価値観やあるいは幸福感についても尋ねています。まず、この報告において、この調査から明らかになったことについて、主としては、今回は文化鑑賞参加行動について2点ご紹介したいと思います。まず1つ目に、パンデミックの前の4年間もまた2022年も文化鑑賞参加行動に全く参加しないという人が回答者の約 40% を占めており、比較的大きな割合となっているということです。2つ目に、次にこの文化鑑賞参加行動に参加していない人は、13歳までも文化体験に関わっていないということが明らかになりました。以下、詳細を見ていきたいと思います。このスライドでは、文化、芸術、文化遺産への関心について回答者の分布を表しています。この質問においては、あなたは芸術、文化、文化遺産に一般に関心がありますかというふうにお伺いをしています。これについて、全く関心がない、あまり関心がない、やや関心がある、関心があるで回答をしてもらったところ、全く関心がないと答えた人が全体の 17.6% に上りました。これについて男女差や都市規模が関係しているか、統計的な検定を行ってみましたが、有意な差は得られませんでした。このような関心というものが実際の文化参加行動に影響があるかについて、次のスライドなどで確認していきたいと思います。このスライドでは、現在の文化鑑賞参加行動についてお伺いしています。あなたは現在、テレビ、CD、動画視聴以外でどのような文化、芸術鑑賞行動をしていますか？該当する項目を選んでくださいというふうに尋ねています。 この結果、鑑賞したことはないと鑑賞したものはないと答えた人が 41.6% に上るということが分かりました。これはコロナ禍が原因かもしれないというふうに考え、2016年から2020年までのコロナ禍前の文化鑑賞参加行動についても、次のスライドで尋ねてみました。よいしょ。ここでは2016年から2020年の2月、すなわちですね、新型コロナ感染症拡大前までに行った文化芸術鑑賞の行動を次から選んでくださいというふうに尋ねた場合でも、回答者の 40.81% は鑑賞したものはないというふうに回答していることが分かりました。では、ここで現在の関心と現在の文化鑑賞参加行動についてクロス集計表というふうに言って相関を見てみたいと思います。このようにして相関を見た場合ですね、関心がある場合には何らかの文化鑑賞参加行動をしているのに対して、あまり関心がないといった人は文化鑑賞参加行動をしていることが見られませんでした。統計的な検定 T 検定を行った場合でも、現在の文化活動への参加の有無と文化の関心の有無には統計学的な有益な関係があることが明らかになりました。では、次のスライドからは、2016年から2020年の間で、文化芸術鑑賞行動について、鑑賞したものはないというふうに答えた913名の方々について焦点を当てていきたいと思います。この結果については、概要は3つ挙げられます。まず1点目に、学歴は回答者全体の分布とあまり変わりがありませんでした。ただし、スライド9枚目で見ますとおり、所得差というものはあります。2つ目に、映画館での映画鑑賞、映画館での舞台中継のライブビューイング、音楽分野を問わずのコンサート、ライブ、フェス、会場でのミュージカル、舞台、演劇鑑賞、会場でのダンス、バレエ、舞台鑑賞、会場での伝統芸能、歌舞伎とかですね、の鑑賞や美術館、博物館、展覧会、芸術祭での鑑賞、オンデマンド動画配信サービスの映画視聴に、また他のイベントの中から、あなたは今13歳のまでの子どもの頃の間に、どのような文化活動に参加したことがありますか？参加したことがあるものについて、すべてお答えくださいというふうについて聞いてみたところ、それでも約 40%、43.98% が、これまで今まで一度も経験をしたことがないというふうに答えていることが分かりました。最後に、文化鑑賞参加行動について、関心があると答えた割合は 5%、やや関心があると答えた割合が 27% ということが分かりました。それでは詳細に見ていきたいと思います。まず、このスライドでは、2016年から2020年の間で、文化芸術鑑賞を行った方と所得の関係を示したものです。この濃い紫色は2016年から2020年の間で文化芸術鑑賞行動について鑑賞したというふうに答えた人で、薄い紫については鑑賞したものはないというふうに答えた人です。これを見ると、所得が低い層では文化芸術鑑賞を行動していないというふうに答えた人が多く、所得が高い層では文化芸術鑑賞行動をしている傾向が見られます。確かに所得については学歴との異なって優位さが得られました。 では次に、この13歳までの経験についてお話をしていきたいと思います。先ほど概要でもお話をしましたが、13歳までの文化芸術鑑賞行動と2016年から2020年の文化芸術鑑賞行動について差を見た場合、13歳までに何かしらの文化芸術鑑賞行動をしたというふうに答えている人は、2016年から2020年の時にも何かしらの文化芸術鑑賞行動をしていることが明らかになり、またその統計的な有意差が得られています。このような文化芸術鑑賞行動の差を見る場合、地域差や居住都市規模感が人々の行動に影響を与えているということが考えられます。政令指定都市に住んでいる場合と、それ以外の場合で、2016年から2020年の間に文化芸術鑑賞行動について差があるかを検証したところ、有意差が得られませんでした。これは文化政策を考える際には地域差を念頭に置くことが多いのですが、実はその必要がないかもしれないという示唆を得ました。では次に教育水準について見てみましょう。この2016年から2020年の文化芸術鑑賞行動をしている人は、大学院以上の教育を得られていることが明らかになり、その差も優位であるということが明らかになりました。最後に、回答者全体の13歳までの文化芸術鑑賞行動について見ておきたいと思います。回答者の約3割の方、29.7% の方々が今までに13歳までにですね、どのようなことも行っていないというふうに回答しています。では、その期間を長くした場合、子どもの頃から学生の間までというふうに長くした場合にはどのようになっているかというふうに見ても、全体の回答者の 23.2% の方が今までどれも経験したことがないというふうに答えています。この報告ではコロナ禍前と現在の文化芸術鑑賞について見てみましたが、この調査の第2部、続いていく部では、人々が認識している文化の価値について、イギリスと日本で非常に興味深い結果が得られていますので、次回のセミナーなどでお話しできればと思います。以上で報告を終了します。ありがとうございました。
はい、迫田さん、どうもありがとうございました。報告に対するコメントとして、文化社会学者で駒澤大学教授の片岡恵美さんより、コメントを頂戴いたしたいと思います。片岡さん、よろしくお願いいたします。
よろしくお願いいたします。聞こえますでしょうか？
大丈夫です。
では、短いスライドを用意しております。
はい、ではスライドこちらでご用意いたします。
本日はよろしくお願いいたします。私は社会学者で、長年文化に関する、日本での調査研究を行ってまいりました。私のリサーチインタレストは、文化資本、ハビトス、文化的オムニボア、これは文化的雑食という意味です。そして、文化的再生産。ほぼどれも、文化的オムニボア以外は、ピエール・ブルデューの理論と、用語を使って、そして、方法論的には、ミックスド、混合的研究法を使って研究をしてまいりました。本日は社会学的な視点から、コメントさせていただきたいと思います。では次のスライドお願いいたします。先ほどのご報告、大変興味深く、拝聴いたしました。で、このサーベイに対して、 私が感じた重要な点を、まず4点、主要なものをご紹介したいと思います。まず1番目、この調査では、コロナ禍が文化参加、あるいはカルチャルエンゲージメントに与えた影響を描き出したという点で大変貴重なデータだと思います。2番目に、またこの研究では文化活動に不参加の人々に焦点を当てた分析をされました。約 40% の不参加者は、おそらく、文化に興味がないという回答を示し続けていたということ。そしておそらく彼らはそういった文化を自分たち向きではないという境界感覚を持っているのではないかと思います。これは、もし社会学的に言うと、彼らは文化から排除されていると解釈することもできるかもしれません。で、その上で、私たちは、文化活動への不参加者をどう見たらよいのか。で、彼らは文化的な、不活性層と見るのか。それとも文化的剥奪者と見るのかという違いがあると思います。で、この違いは、おそらくその後の文化政策への、異なった文化政策へとつながっていくように思っています。3番目に、子どもの文化活動への参加が、成人後の文化活動の参加、不参加に効果を持つという結果はとても興味深かったです。これは私がこれまでやってきた研究、特に社会学的な文化資本に関する研究と非常にリンクしています。ここでいうところの、文化資本の再生産問題と関連が強いということが言えると思います。そういう意味で、今回、社会学もこの研究に社会学的な視点から、少しコメントできたらなと思っております。4番目に、これは全体に対しての私のコメントなんですけれども、ここにいらっしゃる皆さんは、やはり文化政策に関わっていらっしゃる方がとても多いと思いますけれども、調査項目を拝見しますと、やはりアート、いわゆるハイカルチャーと中間文化が中心となった調査項目が調べられている。で、しかしですね、社会学、例えば私の研究もそうなんですが、割と大衆的な文化、それはポピュラーカルチャーだけではなくて、もっとローワーカルチャーっていうものも、文化実践として調査しております。で、そういったローワーなカルチャーも意味のある、実践者にとっては意味のある文化活動だと捉え、階層間、あるいは集団間で、その文化の意味、あるいはその関係性を全体的に考察するというような研究を社会学者たちはしているのですね。で、その上で、この調査、サーベイが、もしかしたらですが、文化政策に関わっている研究者の皆さん、あるいは関係者の皆さんの、が当たり前、自明だと考えている、そのフレームワークを、調査の中に反映されているのではないかという印象を持ちました。それは言い換えれば、ハビトゥス、その研究者のハビトゥスはどういったものなのか。それを、この調査を通じて、再考することができるのではないかと感じました。例えばそれは様々な概念の使い方にも現れると思います。例えば、ここでは語られていませんけれども、いずれ語られるであろう公共政策というような問題。公共とは何なのか。そして、一番大元のアートとは何なのか。 そして文化参加における文化の定義とは何なのか。こういったところをリフレクシブに考え直すというか、検討、異なる社会学者と、例えば文化政策関係者の人との違いというものを見ていくことも非常に興味深いなと思った次第です。次の質問に移りたいと思います。で、日本の調査グループの方々に対しては3つ質問があります。1番目としましては、コロナ前と現在、2022年とで、文化参加の比率、あるいは不参加の比率がほとんど変わらなかったということについて、なぜなのかについて、その理由を、もし何かお分かりなことがありましたら教えていただきたいと思います。2番目の質問は、子供時代の文化参加の年齢がその13歳以下の部分というところがとても強調されていたと思いますが、この13歳という基準を選ばれた理由は何でしょうか。3番目、文化的、雑食性と、そして文化的折衷主義というものは、具体的に言うと、例えば、ハイカルチャーを楽しみながら、ポピュラー、あるいは大衆的な文化も、楽しむというような、そういう雑食的な、スタイルですけれども、これが、世界的に増えています。そういった文化的オムニボアという人たちが世界中で増えているという報告があります。で、果たしてこれは現代の文化資本と言えるのか。これは私のテーマでもあるんですけれども、もし何かお考えのことがありましたら、教えていただければと思います。特にですね、日本の若者は、今、ファンダムといって、アイドルをファンになったり、アニメのキャラクターを好きになったり、ゲームに熱中したりという形で、本当に大衆的、あるいはポピュラーな、文化に熱中している人がとても増えているんですね。特にコロナ禍になって、それが増えたというような印象を持っています。で、彼ら、特に若い人たちのこういったポピュラーカルチャー思考というものを、これからどういうふうに考えていったらいいのか。文化政策との絡み、いろんな側面で考えることができると思いますけれども、もしよろしければお考えをお聞かせいただければと思います。私からは以上です。
はい、片岡先生、どうもありがとうございました。ちょっと時間が押し気味ですので、まずは1番と2番について、迫田さんからご回答お願いいたします。
はい、では調査に関係することですので、まず簡単に私からお話をしたいと思います。まずコロナ禍以前の4年と今でなぜ参加率に差がないのかということですが、これはきっと行く人は行くし、行かない人はずっと行かないで、行かない人はずっと同じということなのかなというふうに考えております。2点目ですが、なぜ13歳までの経験を聞いたのかというふうになことですが、日本では初等教育というのは、国公立、私立で比較的その質的な格差が少ないので、この年齢までを調べることによって、家庭内教育の影響を取り出すことが可能というふうに考えまして、13歳までというふうにいたしました。
ありがとうございました。3つ目の質問、難しいんですけれども、簡単に答えることが。私も、全く同じ現象を見ていまして、自分の教えている学生がもうアニメとか漫画とかのものすっごいオタクで、そういう、あるいはアイドルですね。それも日本のアイドルか K-POP かどちらかなんですけれども、 ものすごくお金と時間を使っていて夢中になっているっていうのはすごくよく見ています。で、彼らが先生がおっしゃるところのオムニボアかどうか雑食主義かどうかは今のところよく分かりません。若い人なので、例えばアメリカのポップアート展を見に行きたいですとか、コンテンポラリー現代アートというものには比較的関心があるようでして、でもそれは若いからであって、いろいろなことに好奇心があることはあるんですけれども、それが文化的な趣味として自分の中で彼らの中で育っていくかどうかで、それが将来的に、仕事の大きなポジションを得るとか出世するとか社会の中で上の地位に上がっていくということに関して役に立つキャピタルになるのかどうかっていうことはちょっとまだわからないなというふうに思っています。これ先生と違って専門ではないので全く個人的な見解に基づいておりますので、よろしければまた後でクエスチョンズ&アンサーズの時にこういった問題も取り上げられるかとは思います。それではちょっと時間も押してますので、次の第2部のイギリス側の発表に移りたいと思います。キングスカレッジロンドンのサナ・キムさん、準備できてますか？ではプレゼンテーション始めてください。
So hi, my name is Sana, and in the next 10 minutes, I will talk you through our main findings regarding cultural engagement in England. So first, I will talk about the levels of interest in the arts, and then I will move on to exploring cultural engagement trends, starting with childhood years and then moving on to adulthood. Towards the end of the presentation, I will zoom in specifically on the public's engagement trends with culture and the arts in local contexts. So here we go. We can see from this slide that over half of the English public appears to be interested in the arts, and a similar proportion expressed hope that their children will enjoy the arts. Just under half indicated that they might be more interested in the arts in the future. 43% of English public can be categorized as not interested in the arts. And finally, about a third of participants believe that the arts are not for them. Interest in the arts does not appear to vary significantly with gender, but does vary with age and across regions and social grade. The data also suggests that representatives of ethnic minority groups are more likely to be interested in the arts than their white counterparts. Interestingly, this group is also slightly more likely to say that the arts are not for them, with 37% saying so, while the average is at 31%, as we saw in the previous slide. So our data seems to suggest that the lack of interest in the arts is sticky or continuous. First, this is because the lack of interest is unlikely to change, at least on its own, because only 25% of those not interested admit the possibility of becoming more interested in the future, compared to 47% on average. Second, because for those not interested in the arts, the lack of interest is the second biggest barrier to engaging in local cultural activities, as we shall see in the second half of the presentation. So the lack of interest significantly overshadows other barriers, such as lack of time or lack of facilities, for example. Finally, the lack of interest could stem from the lack of participation in the arts as child growing into adulthood, as those who are not interested in the arts today as adults were less likely to participate as children. And that applies across all activities we tested in our survey. So having just explored the levels of interest in the arts, I want to show you that it is not an isolated phenomenon and is somehow correlated with levels of engagement with social organizations and activities. So we can see from this slide that those who express interest in the arts are significantly more likely to be involved in all kinds of social organizations and activities, ranging from online communities to labor unions. Now we can move on to unpacking cultural engagement trends, starting with attendance of cultural events during childhood. So watching a film in a cinema setting was the most popular cultural event during childhood. This is followed by museums, theaters, and heritage sites, which suggests that traditional cultural venues play an important role in the cultural lives of young people, or at least did so in the past. This slide summarizes the interest and participation trends of the English public during their childhood years. We can see that reading is by far the most widespread cultural interest and is the most participated in activity during childhood years. We can also see that for most activities, participation levels are pretty consistent with interest levels. The widest gaps between interest and participation exist for activities like being in a music band, circus, musical theater, and carnival. Moving on to engagement trends during adulthood, we found that watching TV is by far the most important form of cultural engagement. This is followed by cooking and gardening, the two activities that can be performed from home. It is then followed by activities that require attending a venue, such as a heritage or historic site, a cinema, a museum. Then we have activities that involve some aspect of active participation, including things like creating content online, dancing, or playing a musical instrument, for example. So the bottom line here is that cultural and artistic activities, which require more active participation, become less important to the public's cultural engagement, except for cooking and gardening. In terms of attendance, we can see from this slide that currently cinema is the most popular venue to attend. This is followed by museums, heritage sites, and theaters, and generally corresponds with the four most popular venues attended by the participants during childhood years. Meanwhile, ballet, classical music concerts, opera, and contemporary dance represent the least attended cultural forms. And before unpacking post-COVID attendance, I would like to mention that 37% of English adults are still hesitant to visit cultural venues due to the risk of contracting the COVID-19 virus. If COVID-19 was no longer an issue in the next 12 months, the majority of the public would still favor attending the cinema over other venues that we tested, but this is lower than the existing level of attendance. Yet attendance for live music events, outdoor festivals, musicals, as well as heritage sites and museums is likely to rise. As for online attendance, we tested 5 cultural events, which traditionally are consumed in person, and we found that 44% of English adults viewed at least one of these events online since 2020. 28% paid the fee to do so. From the first figure, we can see that a pop music concert is the most popular event to be attended online, and that free events generate larger viewership. We also found that viewership of both free and paid events is stronger among the younger population, among those with higher social grade, and those who reside in London. Men are also more predisposed to viewing and paying for viewing cultural events online than women. And finally, ethnic minorities are also significantly more predisposed to viewing cultural events online compared to white population. When it comes to participation, reading by far is the most common activity for the public to participate in. Participation in other types of cultural and artistic activities is much lower. For example, the second most common activity, craft making, is reported by only 15% of the public. Although the levels of reading are likely to drop slightly within the next 12 months, reading would still remain the most common activity for the public to participate in. As people are getting used to living with COVID-19, the levels of participation across other less homebound activities are likely to rise, even though very slightly. Participation could increase most for theater performances, street art, photography, and musical theater. So now we will focus on local culture and the arts. With only 29% saying that there is a good range of cultural and arts events to attend locally, the English public does not appear particularly satisfied with the state of cultural and arts provision in their local areas and local cultural environments more widely. Some cross-regional variation exists here, with Yorkshire residents being the least satisfied with their cultural environments and being more likely to say that having a nicer cultural environment would make them prouder of their local area. London residents, on the other hand, are among the most satisfied. And when it comes to local culture, the English public also displays relatively low levels of interest in getting involved. The appeal of the tested opportunities, we tested 7 in total, appears to be equally weak, with each option attracting only about 20% of the public. Almost half of the public, 45%, are either not sure or unequivocally not interested in any of the options we tested. And notably, this 45% rises to 63% among those who are not interested in the arts. Finally, barriers. Money is the biggest perceived barrier that prevents English adults from becoming more active players in local cultural life. This is followed by lack of time, information, and interest. And as I already mentioned, lack of interest acts as a more significant barrier for those who are not interested in the arts. Furthermore, lack of interest emerged as a more significant barrier among other demographic groups like older people and those without education qualifications. So mindful of the time, I will stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Sana. Okay, the next is the comments to be made by Andrew Moller from Arts Council England. Well, unfortunately, he's no longer available for live discussion, but he has kindly given us the video that records his talks. So could we show the video now?
Good evening. My name is Andrew Moller, and I'm Director of Research at Arts Council England. First of all, I'd like to apologise for not being able to join you for this important seminar on exploring cultural engagement in the UK and Japan. However, I am grateful to Professor Hai-Kyung Lee and the other presenters for allowing me to reflect on the findings of this important report as part of the wider UKRI JSPS Sustainable Cultural Futures project. As with any large-scale survey, there is so much to concentrate on in this report. So over the next few minutes, in particular, I will be focusing on public interest in the arts, the findings and the barriers preventing individuals from engaging in art and culture, as demonstrated through this survey, and how this compares to what we do as the National Development Agency for Creativity and Culture. I will then explain how we as an organisation have recently made investment decisions to achieve our vision through our new strategy, Let's Create, which runs from 2020 to 2030. The vision, which states the following: by 2030, we want England to be a country in which the creativity of each of us is valued and given the chance to flourish, and where everyone has access to a remarkable range of high-quality cultural experiences. Now, this survey asked members of the public for their level of interest in the arts. Findings show that over half, 56%, of the public appears to be interested in the arts, and a similar proportion, 57%, expressed hope that their children will enjoy the arts. However, about a third of participants, 31%, agreed with the following statement: the arts are not for me, with men being slightly more likely to say no at 38%. This is then further broken down into the barriers preventing people from engaging in local cultural activities, and the public have cited lack of interest at 35%, lack of time at 25%, lack of cultural facilities at 17%, and lack of transportation at 12%. The report goes on to say that, on one hand, policymakers want to increase public engagement with the arts and culture broadly. On the other hand, impacted by the austerity policy and strong STEM agenda, they have marginalised the role of culture, and the arts in the public education system, as cuts per capita funding for education have had a disproportionate effect on arts education. Now, whilst this will not have helped public attitude and interest towards arts and culture, undoubtedly other factors are responsible. Ahead of Arts Council England launching its new 10-year strategy, Let's Create, in 2020, we held a conversation with nearly 1,500 people working in the arts and culture sector regarding the challenges and opportunities for the sector and what this meant for us in terms of attitude and interest. And we found the following: that arts, museums and libraries are recognised across the board among the public and the sector as having a valuable role to play, not just in terms of the immediate experiences they offer individuals, but also in terms of their wider societal benefits to education, health and well-being, in celebrating diversity, bringing people together, celebrating shared history and improving local areas. However, the sector and the public feel that more needs to be done to communicate their value and their relevance. Another finding was that while the public may be engaging with the arts, they do not associate their creative activities with the sector. Rather, they tend to define arts and culture through a fairly tight prism. This often focuses on art forms such as classical music, ballet, and opera, underplaying the potential role of the sector in people's lives. In addition, the public often do not know what opportunities are available in their local area. Over half, 53% of English adults do not feel informed about the arts opportunities available to them locally. Sector and the public alike think that there is a need to promote the sector more through communications and campaigns. This could include a targeted communications campaign, in particular showing the idea that there is something for everyone. Diversity is seen as central to the sector. 2/3 of the sector surveyed believe that diversity presents one of the greatest opportunities for the sector over the next 10 years. Yet the sector does not currently reflect society well enough in its workforce, its leadership, participants and audiences. The perception relates most strongly to the arts rather than museums or libraries, and is felt that there is need to go beyond the basic tick box mentality, and instead the public and sector see it as necessary to focus on accessing the broadest range of individuals, regardless of their gender, ethnicity, age, where they live, and in particular, their social background. Linked to this recognition of the need to promote arts museums and libraries to younger audiences, among whom the sector is not seen to be particularly cool or something they want to engage in with their friends, this is seen by many as a key risk for the sector's future workforce, skills, talent, and leadership. The issue is felt to be heightened by the government's perceived current focus on STEM subjects and a public perception that a career in the arts is not particularly secure, particularly after COVID. In talking to people about the next 10 years, we have found that digital technology is viewed as one of the most important developments for arts, museums, and libraries. Initiatives and approaches such as live streaming of events, use of virtual reality, or being able to browse collections or exhibitions online are seen as having the potential to open up the sector to more people, transcending geographic and cultural boundaries, and facilitating a greater mix of art forms and opportunities, especially among younger audiences. However, better digital experiences are wanted alongside real, lived, physical experiences. In addition, it is considered to be important that physical spaces, museums, galleries, libraries, should not be at risk of becoming obsolete. As part of this, the sector, particularly the non-funded sector, believe it to be important to retain equity between arts that use digital practices and non-digital traditional art forms. Finally, the local dimension is seen to be key to the debate about the future of arts museums and libraries. The public want to see a local arts and culture offer that is tailored to their local area. Along with public funding, which is channeled towards a more diverse range of organisations and artists that reflect the communities in which they live, they also want to see funding more equitably distributed. The rest of the country, particularly more rural areas, often feels like a poor relation to London, and there is a perception that it is necessary to better balance investments across England. Taking this final point, I wanted to explain how we as an organisation have recently made investment decisions to bring culture and creativity to every doorstep and raise interest in arts and culture right across England. On the 4th of November this year, we announced our 2023 to 26 investment programme for the next 3 years. In total, 990 organisations will receive a share of £446 million each year, ensuring that more people in more places can find fantastic, fulfilling arts and culture on their doorsteps. In our conversations and research with the public over the past 5 years, we have heard again and again that people want and need easy access to meaningful, impactful cultural events and creative activities in the places where they live. With this portfolio, Arts Council England has focused on making investments to as many people as possible in England, no matter where they come from or what their circumstances. They can get hold of the very best arts and culture on their high streets, in the community spaces of their villages, towns and cities. The latest round of funding will benefit organisations, museums and libraries in every corner of the country, from Northumberland to Norfolk, from Cornwall to Cumbria, with a clear focus on ensuring that investment is concentrated in those places that historically have been underserved. On that, we announced that £43.5 million investment in 78 designated towns and cities in Levelling Up for Culture Places. Levelling Up for Culture Places are priority places outside of London that will be the focus for additional engagement and investment. As well as renewing our support for brilliant established organisations that have done so much to build England's reputation as one of the most creative countries in the world, we are investing in 276 new organisations of all shapes and sizes. As well as reaching new audiences, they will also find and nurture the next generation of cultural and artistic talent, increasing opportunity for people from all communities and all backgrounds. A lot of conclusions from the Sustainable Futures report are ones that we can relate to. For instance, the mismatch between the public and policymakers' everyday understanding of terms such as culture and art. Those who are not interested in the arts are more likely to have lacked opportunities to participate in the arts as children. Different and multiple forms of participation are preferred for different forms of cultural artistic activities. And finally, the public is not particularly satisfied with the state of cultural and arts provision in their local areas. To tackle these challenges, as an organisation, we have made the decision to spread our investments right across the country to ensure that many more people will have access to a wider choice of exceptional art, culture, and creative opportunities on their doorstep. I hope that this has given you a good overview of how we have tackled these issues and challenges, and I am grateful to Professor Ha-Kyung Lee and her team for this insightful report. I do hope that you enjoy the rest of the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was an interesting and very informative talk, and I'm particularly grateful that we could get to know about the latest movements and strategies of Arts Council England. Well, the remaining time is for questions and answers, and I like to invite the audiences to pose questions or comments, your observations or suggestions, recommendations, anything, either in English or in Japanese. Okay, so there is one coming in English. Okay, let me read it out. The first question is okay, regarding the entire project. Okay, so it's about the research project. Could you explain more about why you chose sustainable as a keyword in this project? Maybe the project may focus on changes before and after the pandemic because it's a central agenda to realize more sustainable cultural sector policy. Hai-kyung, could you respond to this? Why we have chosen the term sustainable?
Okay, sorry. And yeah, this is a very good question. So because our proposal was sort of created in response to the UK, UKRI and JSPS call for research on the impact of COVID-19 crisis on society, including many different sections of the society. So we were interested in looking at this impact of COVID on the cultural sector broadly, and particularly on cultural workers. So we are going to discuss, what are the situation, what the current institutions of cultural work are operating, and how some of these or all of these could improve to tackle particularly the issue of precarity in cultural labor. So the sustainability, this is a key term for us in relation to the COVID situation. And also we want to go beyond just talking about the COVID and its immediate impacts. We try to look at some fundamental issues, more structural issues in the cultural sector, in its workforce, and in its its response to the advance at the arrival of advanced technologies. So in a way that we want to look at these fundamental issues and go beyond this the discussion around the COVID impacts.
Okay, thank you. The next question is about each survey conducted in Japan and in the UK. How do you think your survey findings can be or should be used for policy discussion and policy making? For instance, the survey can be potentially used to justify increasing or decreasing budgets for specific subsectors said. 迫田さんできる？どのように政策に活かせると思いますか？
では答えをします。そうですね。一番の興味深い日本の調査において興味深い点というのは、実は地域差がないんじゃないかというところですね。についてかなと思います。文化というふうになりますと、どうしても地域差、例えば東京の人はいろいろな環境に恵まれているだろうというふうに思ったりとか、あるいは田舎の方ですね、日本に住んでいるといろいろな環境がないじゃないかというふうに思われる方がいるんですが、実は行く人は行くし、行かない人は行かないというようなことを考えるときに、やはり今後さまざまな財源を文化政策に充てるときに、そのように使えるのではないかなというふうに、経済政策として一つ考えられるかなというふうに思います。
はい、ありがとうございました。私も日本の文化政策にこれはいろいろと使っていけるのではないかと思っておりまして、日本で文化に興味がない、参加しないと言っている人たちは、本当を言うと特に何かが欠けているわけではないんですね。お金、収入や、学歴の点から文化に積極的な人たちと比べて大きな特徴があるわけではない。でもそこの人たちのポテンシャルがまだまだ 40% も 関心を持ってくれるかもしれない人と、今はないと言っていますけれども、40% ものポテンシャル層が潜在的な鑑賞者がいるということは、そこを刺激していくには本当にどうしたらよいのかなと、片岡先生のコメントで、その方たちというのが単に関心がなくて、その興味を開いていないだけなのか、それとも、何か非常に不利な条件にある人たちなのかというご質問がありましたけれども、この 40% の人たちというのは特に不利な条件というよりは、日本の場合だと忙しい、仕事が忙しいというのがかなりな大きな理由でして、そこのところを働き方改革ですとか、いろいろな政策的な手段で変えていくことは可能ではないかなと思っています。それでは、どうしましょう。次に、ブルデューに関する質問が英語できましたので、片岡先生、心の準備をお願いいたします。英語でそのまま読ませていただきます。Professor of Cultural Sociology at University of Edinburgh, Professor Nick Pryor is asking a question. Thanks for the talks today. I have a question about Bourdieu. We are at the moment now when Bourdieu's ideas are being challenged quite effectively with respect to more fluid boundaries between high and low culture, class de-alignment, and the lack of fine-grained understanding of what culture means. Would the panel care to comment on why we might need to go beyond Bourdieu in the digital age? 片岡先生だけではないかもしれません。他の方もご自由に、文化のそのバウンダリー、ハイとローとか、階級の差というもの、あるいは、何でしたっけ、その何がカルチャー、何をもって文化と定義するのかということに関する相対化が起きている今日、どのように、特にデジタル時代の今日、どのように考えたらよいか、質問というより、私たちのコメントを引き出したいということのようですので、どなたでも結構ですが、どなたかパネリストの方、手を挙げていただけましたらいかがでしょうか。では、やはりまずはご専門の片岡先生、いかがでしょうか。
はい、質問をありがとうございました。ご質問者の方のおっしゃる通り、確かに文化のハイ&ローの境界線はかなり揺らいでいます。で、それは一つには文化的オムニボアの存在がありまして、ただ、そのピーターソンらが、アメリカのピーターソンらが提案したオムニボア概念なんですけれども、それがまだ不明確な部分がいっぱいあって、私も最近いろんな方々の世界の論文を、チェックした結果ですね、まだ文化的オムニボアが多角化した美的な基準を持った人たちなのかどうかについては、明確な回答はありません。私は文化的オムニボアは3種類からなっていると思っていて、卓越化した美的感覚を持って、地位を向上させていける人たちと、それから低い階層から来て、ハイカルチャーも流行に乗って摂取していた不安定な自信のないオムニボアと、それからもう一ついるんですけれども、そういうふうにいくつか分かれていく段階で、そういう視点から見ると、ハイとローの基準が見えにくくなっているのは事実です。で、一方で、オムニボアの人たちは、ポピュラーカルチャーの中から良い作品、あるいは神聖性というか、オーセンティシティの基準で、良いものだけを選んで、自分の基準、自分のセンスを高めていくことで、 それをこう卓越化に使ってるっていう、そういう人たちもいますので、新しいそのデジタル時代における新しいクリエイティブ産業の、新しい労働者たちにとっては、とても重要な作業、重要な、美的感覚の獲得の状態にあるんだと理解しております。ですので、階級のカルチャーが非常に見えにくくはなっていますけれども、そして文化的なバウンダリーも見えにくくはなっていますけれども、その美的なものによる択一化っていうものが、今、どこにあるかっていうことを世界中で多分探している段階だと思います。以上です。
ありがとうございました。Thank you very much. Is anybody from the UK wanting to make any comments on this? Either Sana or Haegyeong. Okay, Haegyeong, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Very interesting question, important question. So I absolutely agree that culture definition can be very broad and more democratic. So in an ideal situation, maybe there could be more dialogue between fandom studies and media studies, digital consumption studies scholars, and cultural policy scholars like us. So because all these activities we are concerned can be included in the meaning of culture and the broadened, understanding of the arts. However, at the same time, these pop culture activities, fan activities, they are driven by market forces, and they are happening in the marketplace without state intervention. So if we want to say that these activities should be under purview of cultural policy, but still we wouldn't agree that there should be any sort of government interventions into this area of our private life. So I want to just mention this potential conflict within this the attempts to radically democratize the meaning of culture as an object of cultural policy, if you like. And at the moment, the Arts Council is really determined to democratize culture and the arts, and its approach is bring arts and culture that are defined by the Arts Council to the regions, to local communities. So that is on the way, potentially radically reshaping the country's arts policy. However, the public's understanding of culture might be different, and I think that Sana can make a comment on this gap in public perception of culture, because we try to ask the public, like, how you define culture, and we struggled. We couldn't make a nice question, so we used an alternative question, which is about how would you define creativity? So over to you, Sana. So I can show the slide. You are on mute. So just let me show you. While you are talking, I'll share the slide.
Yes, so we received very interesting data on how people define the word creativity. So we asked in the survey, is it wrong? Yeah. So we asked the people to write 2 or 3 words, whatever pops up in their mind when they see the word creativity, and we found that the majority of the public associate the term creativity with art. Interestingly, Arts Council and policymakers, cultural policymakers in the UK are trying to step away from using art in their articulation of cultural policy documents and use culture more often. But as we can see from this word cloud, we can see that only 2 people from our sample wrote culture to that question. So only 2 people associated the word creativity with culture, which I think sort of really highlights this issue of how the everyday understandings of culture between general public and policymakers.
Okay, thank you very much. Right. The next comment is from cultural policy researcher that we are familiar with from the UK. And he says, just on that level of interest point, working patterns idea, I think he's responding to my comment on the lack of time because as a reason for not attending in the arts. One of the problems of assuming its working patterns, etc., is that it means cultural organizations have no incentive to program in ways people might actually want. Perhaps the reason for lack of interest is that people are acting rationally in response to cultural programming that doesn't interest, engage, or represent them. I think what he suggests is that, for instance, in Japan, museums and art galleries tend to close at 5 p.m. during the week. And I think in the UK, they are open until a bit later, but they tend to be open from 9 to 5 or 10 to 6. And that doesn't fit our working style. And there, as he says, there is no incentive to change the way they open themselves to the public. Does anybody want to comment upon this? Well, none of us works for cultural organization in particular, but we do have some observations, I think.
I think it's related to the definition of needs and demand in economics. What we call need demand is we can define in definition. However, when we talk about needs is what people really want to. So maybe when we measure the demand, we can't we say the people doesn't demand the culture anymore. However, we see the needs of people's, so we can't measure, and we can't capture the needs of all.
Okay, so there's a significant difference between need and demand. Demand can be measured, whereas need cannot be. Okay, and how does that relate to this issue of, incentivize cultural organizations to fit the demands of the public rather than the need of the public?
Indeed.
Okay, I see. Does anybody have any comment on this issue from the UK? You could comment, you could talk, you could discuss the changing patterns of provision of culture in the UK, if you like. For example, as I said, some museums have started to open until late. I'm aware that Tate Modern, for instance, is open until 10 p.m. or something from Friday to Saturday or Thursday to Saturday. What do you think of it? What do you think, why do you think have they changed their opening patterns in the UK? Is that to respond to the need of the public or demand of the public?
I just to provide a quick comment, and I think so particularly the demand from young generation or potential museum visitors and etc. So these attempts were quite successful, and it's before COVID. Of course, I don't know whether they are doing this now, but before COVID, there were these attempts at the well-established museums, and the events were funded by business sponsors in some cases. This kind of museums getting funding elsewhere and then organizing events kind of, not hiring, but inviting a DJ and playing pop music, and so that young people just casually can come and enjoy exhibitions such as music and socializing with each other. So these are very interesting experiments. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Actually, it's time for us to wrap up. It's been very short, but as I said at the beginning, we have more seminars and workshops or something like that are open to the public. And we encourage you to keep your eye on our development, or we'll send you some notice so that you can attend. Thank you very much indeed for all the panelists and those audiences who have made comments and suggestions and encouraging remarks as well. Okay, thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.